Something is happening on the patios and windowsills of people who gave up waiting for garden space. Their harvests are arriving faster, their plants are lasting longer, and their grocery bills are shrinking from a collection of pots most people treat as decoration. The same vegetables and herbs dismissed as container afterthoughts are outperforming in-ground versions when the right conditions are met. These 20 are producing more, lasting longer, and asking for less than anything growing in the ground beside them. Number 20, rosemary. Most people kill rosemary in the ground by giving it exactly what the surrounding garden provides: rich soil, regular watering, and shelter from wind. In those conditions, rosemary produces soft, disease-prone growth that looks healthy for one season and collapses in the second. In a container, the dynamic reverses completely. A terracotta pot dries out faster than garden soil, drains freely after rain, and warms quickly in sun, replicating the rocky, arid hillsides of southern Europe where rosemary evolved. The plant responds by producing the dense, resinous, intensely aromatic growth that is the point of growing it in the first place. Rub a sprig between your fingers on a warm afternoon and the oils release immediately. A sharp, piney warmth that dried rosemary from a jar never comes close to matching. That fragrance is the plant's defense mechanism, produced most intensely when the plant is slightly stressed by heat and drought rather than comfortable and well-fed. A rosemary plant in the right container lives for a decade or more, requiring nothing beyond an annual trim after flowering to keep it from becoming leggy. It is the container plant that gets better with age rather than declining, producing more resinous growth in year 5 than it did in year 1. The next plant also improves with age, but it does something in winter that most container gardeners have never thought to use it for. Number 19, thyme. Thyme in a container produces more usable harvest than thyme in the ground, and the reason is straightforward. In garden soil, thyme sprawls. The center of the plant becomes woody and unproductive, and the usable growth concentrates at the edges of an increasingly large, increasingly sparse plant. In a container, the growth stays compact, dense, and accessible. A 10-centimeter pot of thyme placed on a kitchen windowsill in winter continues producing through the coldest months, when the outdoor plant has retreated into minimal survival mode and the garden offers nothing fresh. Snip the stem tips, rather than pulling leaves individually, and the plant branches more densely with each cut, producing a fuller, more productive specimen than one left unpicked. Lemon thyme, in particular, carries a citrus note alongside the familiar herbal depth that makes it one of the more interesting cooking herbs available. Used fresh, the flavor has a brightness that disappears entirely in the dried version. If this list is already making you rethink what a container can produce, hit the like button right now. It pushes this information toward every gardener still thinking containers are only for basil and nothing more serious. The next plant goes into the ground once and keeps coming back for years. Most people have never considered growing it in a pot, but the results change that opinion fast. Number 18, chives. Chives are as close to a permanent, zero-effort harvest as container gardening offers, and almost nobody treats them that way. Plant a clump once in a 20-centimeter container. Cut the entire bunch to within 3 centimeters of the soil surface when you need them. Within a week, new shoots push up from the base. That cycle repeats indefinitely, across years without replanting, without feeding beyond an annual top dressing of compost, and without any attention between harvests. The flowers appear in late spring as round purple pom-poms that are fully edible and carry a milder onion flavor than the leaves. Scattered over a salad or a bowl of soup, they are the garnish that restaurants charge for and charge guests to admire. They come from a container that cost almost nothing to establish. Left in the same pot through winter, chives die back completely to bare soil and then push fresh growth again in early spring with the kind of reliability that most perennial plants never manage from a container. What comes next is the opposite of reliable in amateur hands. In a container, it becomes almost foolproof. Number 17, basil. Basil is one of the most purchased and most quickly killed herbs in home growing, and the reason is almost always the same. It goes from the shop into garden soil or a large pot with other plants, gets overwatered, and collapses within 2 weeks. In a dedicated small container with free draining compost and a position in full sun, basil behaves differently. The roots stay warm and never sit in standing water. The plant produces the large, glossy, fragrant leaves that the supermarket version, grown fast under artificial light for shelf life rather than flavor, never develops. Pinch out the growing tip as soon as the plant reaches 15 centimeters, before any flower buds form. This single action redirects the plant's energy from seed production into leaf production and delays bolting by several weeks. Do it consistently whenever a flower stem begins to appear, and the plant continues producing through summer. Tear a fresh leaf rather than cutting it and hold it close. The scent is immediate and complex, a warmth and sweetness that the bruised, slightly oxidized leaves in a plastic bag from a refrigerated shelf do not resemble at any meaningful level. That covers the herb most people already grow. The next one is the herb most people have never thought to grow, and it produces a harvest that has no adequate commercial substitute. Number 16. Vietnamese coriander, standard coriander bolts. It germinates eagerly, produces a few weeks of usable leaves, sends up a flower stem the moment temperatures rise, and is finished before most gardeners feel they have gotten adequate return from the space it occupied. Vietnamese coriander, Persicaria odorata, does not bolt. It is a perennial in warm conditions and a long-lived annual in cooler ones, producing the same sharp, citrus-edged flavor as standard coriander from a plant that keeps growing through heat rather than collapsing under it. In a container, it spreads into a dense, trailing mass of pointed leaves that roots wherever a stem contacts moist compost. Bring it inside before the first frost, and it continues producing on a windowsill through winter, extending what would be a 3-week outdoor harvest into a 6-month one. The flavor is slightly more intense than standard coriander, with a peppery edge underneath the citrus that works in Southeast Asian cooking, the way the standard variety works in Mexican and Indian dishes. Once you grow it, the annual coriander becomes the backup plan, rather than the default. The gap between what this plant produces and what most people grow instead is significant. The next gap is even bigger, and it involves a plant that most people pay a premium for every single week. Number 15. Salad leaves mixed. A container 50 centimeters wide and 15 centimeters deep, planted with a mixed loose leaf variety and managed on a cut and come again schedule, produces more fresh salad per square centimeter than almost any other edible plant in this list. Cut the entire container to 5 centimeters above the soil surface. New growth pushes from the base within a week. That cycle produces 4 to 6 full cuttings before the plants eventually bolt, which means one container sown in spring delivers fresh salad into midsummer without a single replanting. Start a second container 6 weeks after the first, and the harvests overlap, eliminating any gap in supply. The economics are stark. A bag of mixed salad leaves at retail costs between $2 and $4 and lasts 3 to 4 days in the refrigerator before the edges begin to brown and the texture softens. A container of mixed leaves costs a few cents in seed and produces the equivalent of 8 to 10 retail bags before it needs replacing. Leaves harvested directly into a bowl without refrigeration between plant and plate retain their cell structure in a way that prepackaged leaves do not. The texture difference is immediately apparent. The next plant produces a texture difference of a completely different kind. Number 14. Cherry tomatoes. Container cherry tomatoes produce yields that rival in-ground plants in most seasons, and in one specific respect, they consistently exceed them: flavor consistency. In-ground tomatoes receive whatever rainfall arrives, which means alternating periods of drought and saturation that produce the blossom end rot and fruit splitting that frustrate most tomato growers. A container with daily checking allows the gardener to maintain the consistent moisture that prevents both problems entirely. That moisture consistency also produces fruit that develops its sugar content evenly, rather than surging and stalling with irregular water supply. Sungold, the orange cherry variety, produces clusters of thin-skinned fruit from July through October with a sweetness so concentrated it reads more like a fruit than a vegetable. Eaten straight from the plant, still warm from the afternoon sun, it is one of the better experiences a kitchen garden produces. Feed weekly with a high potassium liquid fertilizer from first flowering. Skip 2 consecutive feedings in peak season, and the yield drop is noticeable within 10 days. The plant coming up next produces a yield drop for a completely different reason when grown in the ground, and the container version solves the problem without any additional effort. Number 13, eggplant. Eggplant wants warm roots. That single requirement explains why it underperforms in most temperate garden soils and thrives in containers on paved surfaces. Garden soil in temperate climates stays below the root temperature threshold eggplant needs well into summer, often into July, limiting the plant's productive window before it ever gets properly established. A dark container on a south-facing paved surface absorbs heat and holds it, maintaining a root zone temperature several degrees warmer than the surrounding soil from the moment the pot goes outside in late spring. Compact varieties like Patio Baby produce full-sized, deep purple fruit from plants that reach 50 to 60 centimeters, fitting comfortably on a balcony or patio edge without dominating the space. The skin should give slightly under thumb pressure when ripe. Slice one open at that moment, and the flesh is creamy white with minimal seed development, which is the texture that proper eggplant cooking depends on, and that commercially grown fruit, picked early for transit resilience, rarely provides. Next up is a plant that thrives in heat as well, but produces something from a container in a way that defies what most people expect from a pot that size. Number 12, cucumbers. Standard cucumber varieties in containers fail because their root systems exceed what most containers can provide. Bush varieties bred specifically for container growing tell a completely different story. Space Master and Bush Pickle stay compact, produce full-size cucumbers from plants reaching 60 to 90 centimeters, and perform best in 40-liter containers with a simple vertical support. They fruit continuously in warm conditions, delivering 2 to 3 cucumbers per plant every 5 to 7 days during peak season. The critical management point is water. Cucumbers are more than 90% water by composition, and any period of moisture stress during fruit development produces bitter cucumbers that are unpleasant to eat and signal the plant to stop producing. In a container, this means checking moisture levels daily in warm weather, rather than relying on a schedule. A cucumber picked at 20 centimeters and eaten within the hour has a crispness and a mild, fresh flavor that refrigerated supermarket cucumbers, waxed for shelf life, and shipped across continents, genuinely do not possess. The next plant produces a harvest that is even more immediate from seed to table, and in a container far shallower than most people expect. Number 11, radishes. 22 days. That is the time between sowing and pulling the first radish in warm conditions. No other edible plant on this list comes close. In a container 15 centimeters deep, radishes complete their entire life cycle before most vegetables have established their root systems. A single sowing fills a window box with crisp, peppery roots in under a month. The succession method stretches this productivity across an entire season. Sow a short row every 10 days, and the container is never idle between harvests. The texture of a freshly pulled radish is the argument for growing them. Firm, snappy, with a heat that builds briefly, then clears. Nothing in the refrigerated produce section replicates that texture because it begins deteriorating within hours of harvest. Radishes also reveal container mix problems faster than any other plant. Stunted, misshapen roots mean compaction or inconsistent watering. Solving those problems before slower crops go into the same container saves an entire season. Something far slower and far more rewarding is coming up next. The wait it asks for is genuinely worth it. Number 10, asparagus. Plant asparagus crowns in a deep container, at least 45 centimeters, and the dynamic shifts dramatically from what in-ground growing usually produces. The raised, warm root zone suits asparagus crowns better than cold, heavy garden soil, which is why container-grown asparagus often produces usable spears a full season earlier than in-ground plants. The drainage that containers naturally provide prevents the crown rot that ends asparagus beds before they reach productive age. Once established, these crowns produce spears every spring for 10 to 20 years. The same container filling that went in this season pushes new growth next March, and the March after that, long after every annual vegetable in the adjacent containers has been replanted multiple times. Harvest spears at 20 centimeters before the tips begin to feather open. Snap them at the base rather than cutting, and the plant is already forming the next one underground. Steam them for 4 minutes. Add nothing but butter, and eat them standing over the kitchen counter because they will not wait, and neither will you. If you have made it this far without subscribing, this is the moment. Hit the subscribe button right now. Every week this channel publishes exactly this kind of knowledge. The practical, specific guides that most gardening content never goes deep enough to deliver. Up next is a plant that most people only grow for one of its 2 harvests. The second one is the better one. Number 9, beetroot. Beetroot in a container is 2 crops in one container, and most gardeners only ever collect one of them. The leaves are edible from 4 weeks after germination, nutritionally similar to Swiss chard, with a deep earthiness and a red pigment that bleeds dramatically into whatever it is cooked with. Harvesting the outer leaves progressively while the root develops below does not reduce the final root yield. It extends the productive use of the container from 4 weeks after sowing, rather than waiting the full 10 to 12 weeks for roots alone. Round varieties like Detroit and Bolterdy suit container depths of 30 centimeters, which most medium containers already provide. Long varieties need 50 centimeters or more to develop correctly, which most containers do not provide. Roast a freshly harvested beetroot whole in its skin until a knife slides in without resistance, then peel it while still warm. The sweetness that comes out of a freshly grown root, concentrated by roasting, is something the vacuum-packed boiled version sold in supermarkets does not prepare you for. The next plant asks for more depth, but produces something no other plant on this list can claim. A harvest you can make wine from, syrup from, and medicine from, all in the same season. Number 8, elderflower and elderberry. Most gardeners cut elder back the moment it appears uninvited along a fence line. In a large container, that same plant becomes one of the most productive and versatile harvests a patio can produce. Grown in a 60-liter container and kept to a manageable size through annual pruning after fruiting, elder produces elderflowers in early summer and elderberries by early autumn. The flowers, harvested the moment they open fully, steep into a cordial, the color of pale honey, floral and faintly muscat-like. The berries, ready when they hang in deep purple-black clusters, cook down into a syrup with a tart, winey depth that no commercial berry matches. Raw elderberries, uncooked elder leaves, and bark are mildly toxic. The cooking that syrup and cordial recipes require exists for that reason, not as a suggestion that can be ignored. Handled correctly, a single container elder produces 2 harvests per year with nothing more than water and an annual prune. 2 harvests from one container, and neither of them requires replanting. What comes next produces a third kind of harvest that most people have never considered growing in a pot. Number 7, strawberries. Everbearer strawberry varieties in containers produce 3 distinct flushes of fruit from May through September, rather than the single concentrated June harvest that standard varieties deliver. The runner habit that makes strawberries invasive in open beds becomes an asset in container growing. Runners emerging from the main plant are redirected into adjacent small pots, each rooting within 3 weeks and becoming a new plant. One original plant becomes 5 or 6 by the end of its first season, and each of those becomes next year's starting point, multiplying the harvest without spending another cent on plants. Strawberries eaten within 20 minutes of picking from a container beside the kitchen door taste genuinely different from the ones that spent 3 days in refrigerated transport. The flavor is warmer, deeper, and closer to what the word strawberry is supposed to mean before commercial growing optimized for shelf life rather than taste. The next plant is not a fruit at all, but it produces a harvest from a container that many people consider the most satisfying of anything on this list. Number 6, potatoes. A 40-liter fabric grow bag, filled progressively using the earthing up method, produces 4 to 6 kilograms of potatoes from a footprint smaller than a dining chair. That yield regularly surprises people seeing a container potato harvest for the first time. The fabric bag matters. It breathes in a way that solid plastic cannot, preventing the waterlogging that rots tubers and allowing the root zone to stay oxygenated through the growing cycle. As the roots hit the air at the bag's edges, they stop growing and produce lateral branching that develops more tubers. This air pruning effect is unique to fabric containers and is part of why fabric bags outperform solid containers for this specific crop. Early varieties finish in 60 to 70 days, freeing the bag for a second crop well within the same season. Tip the bag onto a tarpaulin and run your hands through the compost. The potatoes are there, clean and still warm, and the smell of fresh compost and new potatoes together is one of the more satisfying moments a container garden delivers. The next plant produces something entirely different, but equally immediate in its impact from the moment it is harvested. Number 5, mint. Mint belongs in a container, not because it is well suited to one, but because it is too aggressive for any alternative. In open ground, mint travels through underground runners at a speed that most gardeners underestimate badly in the first season. By the second, it has colonized the surrounding bed, the path edges, and is investigating the lawn. In a container, that same vigor produces a dense, deeply productive plant that fills the pot and provides continuous harvest without threatening anything nearby. Pick from the stem tips regularly, and the plant branches more densely with each harvest, building into a fuller specimen than one left to grow unpicked. Allow it to flower, and the leaves become less palatable almost immediately as the plant directs energy from leaf production into seed. Pinch out every flower stem as it appears, and the harvest window extends by several weeks. Rub a fresh mint leaf between your fingers and hold it close. The oils release immediately, sharp and intensely cool, in a way that dried mint sold in plastic jars never manages. The gap between fresh and dried mint is one of the larger flavor differences in home cooking, and it is resolved entirely by a single 10-centimeter pot on a windowsill. The next plant has a flavor gap between fresh and commercial that is even more dramatic, and it produces from one of the smallest containers on this list. Number 4, lemon balm. Lemon balm is one of the most underused herbs in home growing, and one of the most immediately rewarding from a container. The leaves carry a clean, bright lemon scent that is closer to lemon zest than lemon juice, with none of the acidity. And it comes from a plant that grows vigorously in a container, tolerates partial shade better than most herbs, and comes back year after year without replanting. Cut the plant back hard after it flowers, and it produces a flush of tender new growth that is more fragrant than the mature leaves it replaced. Steep a handful of fresh leaves in hot water for 5 minutes, and the resulting tea is a different experience from anything that comes in a commercially packaged herbal tea bag. The volatile oils that carry the lemon scent are present in the fresh leaf at concentrations that dried and processed versions cannot preserve. The medicinal literature around lemon balm is more substantial than most people expect for a plant this easy to grow. Documented effects on anxiety, sleep quality, and cognitive function have been confirmed in multiple clinical trials, none of which changes the fact that as a kitchen herb, it is simply one of the more pleasant things a container can produce. The next plant produces something that most people pay several dollars per bunch for, from a container that essentially never needs replanting. Number 3, flatleaf parsley. Flatleaf parsley in a container produces more usable herb than the curly variety, with a stronger, cleaner flavor that makes the curly version, grown primarily for its appearance rather than its taste, difficult to justify. Sow directly into a 20-centimeter container rather than transplanting. Parsley develops a taproot early and resents being moved once that root has established. Germination is slow, 3 to 4 weeks in cool conditions, and during that time the compost should stay consistently moist, but never waterlogged. Once established, harvest by cutting outer stems at the base rather than snipping leaf tips. This encourages the plant to continue producing from the center sur rather than stalling after a partial harvest. A well-managed parsley plant in a container produces usable herb for 12 months across 2 seasons before it flowers in its second year and needs replacing. The flavor of fresh, flat-leaf parsley is assertive enough to carry a dish on its own, something the dried version never manages. Chopped and added at the end of cooking, rather than during it, the green stays vivid and the flavor stays sharp. Now for the 2 that anchor every container herb garden, and the reason they are treated as a system rather than individual plants. Number 2. Climbing beans. A container 40 centimeters wide and 40 centimeters deep, planted with 4 climbing bean plants against a 2-meter bamboo frame, converts unused vertical space into one of the most productive food structures a patio can support. The output from this setup surprises people because the expectation for container beans is low. 3 to 5 kilograms of pods across a 10 to 12-week season is not unusual from a well-managed container climbing bean, harvested every 2 to 3 days at peak production to keep the plant in continuous flowering mode. The vertical structure serves a second purpose beyond food production. A container of climbing beans in full growth creates a living screen that blocks sight lines, reduces wind on adjacent containers, and produces a green density on a patio that no ornamental climber matches for practical combined effect. Pick pods at the stage when they snap cleanly with a sharp sound, and the seed inside has not yet swelled visibly. At that stage, they are at their most tender, cook in 4 minutes, and need nothing beyond butter and salt to justify the entire growing effort. What comes next is not a single plant or a single container. It is the idea that changes how this entire list should be read. Number 1. The container as a system. Here's what the previous 19 entries have actually been building toward. Every plant on this list performs better in a container under one condition that in-ground growing rarely provides by accident: control. Container growing forces daily attention to each plant in a way that open bed gardening does not require and does not reward in the same immediate way. You know when the compost is dry because the container tells you by weight when you lift it. You know when the plant is stressed because it is close enough to examine every day. You know when to harvest because the container is within reach of the kitchen rather than at the end of a garden. That daily proximity is the real productivity driver, not the container itself. The second element is rotation. A container emptied after one crop is ready for the next one within hours. The 40-liter bag that grew garlic through winter, grows zucchini through summer, and grows salad through autumn. 3 productive cycles from a single container in 12 months. An in-ground bed cleared after harvest still needs weathering, amendment, and time before it is ready for the next crop. The third element is what containers allow you to do with microclimates. Move the pepper into more sun. Bring the basil inside before the first frost. Rotate the strawberries to a shadier position in the heat of July to extend the harvest. These adjustments are impossible in the ground and routine in containers. Plant these 20 in sequence, in the right containers, managed with the daily attention containers reward, and the result is not a collection of pots producing occasional harvests. It is a continuous, rotating food system that produces something edible on most days of the growing year from a space most people currently fill with furniture and nothing more. The containers were always capable of this. The only thing missing was knowing what to put in them. Thanks for watching. If this list changed how you think about container growing, let us know in the comments which plant surprised you most. And click the next video on the left, because what we cover there about no-dig growing systems makes everything on this list look like the beginning of something considerably bigger.